Hello again. I talked yesterday about this extraordinary book called Black British Lives Matter. I want to talk about the horrible way in which books like this promote racism and try to cause division between different ethnic groups in Britain. I'm going to read a few bits from a chapter here called Black British Health Matters, and it's subtitled Racism is the Biggest Threat to Our Health. That chapter is written by somebody called Nadine White. I want to look at a single aspect of the way that racism apparently harms the health of black people in Britain. We read that the death rate for black women in childbirth is 4 times higher than for white women. This is absolutely true, of course. How does racism cause this higher mortality rate? Do black women receive less effective medical treatment during pregnancy than white women? Of course not. Are black people denied the necessary drugs or life-saving measures when giving birth? No. So what does cause this higher mortality rate? And that is fairly easy to answer. In the description to this video, I give a link to a section from the government website which is entitled bluntly, Overweight Adults. We learn that 3/4 of black people in this country are overweight. This compares with 63% of white British people and just 35% of people of Chinese heritage. This, by the way, is the same gradient of which I have spoken before, which has black people at one end, Chinese at the other, and white people in the middle. You'll see this with educational achievement, for example, rates of imprisonment, all sorts of things, income as well. People who are overweight are more likely to suffer from high blood pressure, high levels of blood fat, diabetes, cholesterol, all risk factors, of course, for heart disease and strokes. In pregnancy, these are also risk factors for things like preeclampsia and so on. This is the chief reason that so many black women die during childbirth and why so few Chinese women in this country do. Being really overweight when you're giving birth makes it more likely you're going to die in the process. Now, being overweight is something we can all choose to be or choose not to be. I've been overweight myself when I've indulged too often in biscuits and pies, and it takes a stern effort to keep myself at a healthy weight. Many of us have this struggle, but it's nothing to do with racism. Or is it? Elsewhere in this same chapter, Nadine White explains why so many black women are fat, and as one might expect, the cause is slavery, which of course ended hundreds of years ago in the Caribbean. She says that while in captivity, enslaved black people were given starchy scraps such as cornmeal, lard, molasses and flour, discarded by their white owners who kept the best and most nutritious food for themselves. Well, of course, this may well have been true in the 18th century. She continues, centuries later, we regularly consume similar foods and celebrate it as culture while still being overworked and stressed. Do you see where I'm going with this? Well, I, for one, don't see where she is going, and it sounds completely mad. Black people are not the only ones, of course, to have cultural traditions relating to food and drink. I come from a working class background which had its own traditions relating to food. But that doesn't mean that I have to follow those same traditions and eat the way that my great-grandparents did. Just because my grandfather lived on tuppenny balled pies, that's no reason really for me to follow suit. I remember the diet which many working class families had in the 1950s, and it was not very healthy, to say the least of it, partly through poverty and partly through ignorance about nutrition. There was hardly any fresh fruit, vegetables were boiled down to mush, loads of bread and potatoes as filler foods, fatty meat and so on. If I chose to follow that same diet today, then I think my health would probably suffer. Because it's my culture, it's a lousy reason to do anything. It certainly wouldn't be a good and sufficient reason for me to eat an inadequate or harmful diet now. Black women die more often in childbirth because they are more likely to be overweight than white women. Being fat is not caused by racism at all. It's a consequence of being greedy and immoderate in eating. To suggest that slavery is responsible for black women eating too many fattening foods today is grotesque. This, then, is the mad and dangerous logic upon which elements of anti-racism rely, a standard of discourse which one might find at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. It means that we must treat black people uniquely as lacking any responsibility for their actions and not being held to account for the choices which they make. Every other person in the country is recognised as having responsibility for what they eat and how much of it they consume. For black people, though, slavery has, it seemed, robbed them of that responsibility for all time, and so they still suffer unnecessarily premature deaths because of things which happened to their distant ancestors in the 18th century.